What do you feel that the biggest disparities are in working in these other communities compared to the work that you do in the US?
Yeah, I mean, I think really resources and access are the two biggest issues. We take for granted that, we're going to pick up the phone and call 911 and an ambulance is going to show up at our house and take us to a hospital. And in so many of these countries, that's just not a given. They're in remote villages, they're dirt roads, and, struggling with access. In neurosurgery, timing is everything, especially when it comes to head trauma. And it's critical that they see a neurosurgeon quickly. And then resources. We take for granted that we have sterile supplies, that we have a sterile operating room. In India, there's no air conditioning in the hospital. So, when I go there, it is just boiling, and, whenever I come home from these trips to India, I'm always so grateful for everything we have here, and it really puts this lens on, what we do and how easy it is for us to do it, here, when they're struggling with, the very basics.
Welcome, everybody, to episode 2 of season 5 of the Game On Glio podcast. We have an amazing female neurosurgeon on our show today that's going to be talking to us a lot about her struggles and her choices in getting to where she is today, and about an amazing book that she wrote. A lot of what we were talking about when I sat down with her got me thinking about my own life choices and all of the choices that we have a tendency to make. A lot of times when things happen in our lives, we have a tendency to look internally and to question why we don't have so much power and so much control over the things that are going on in our lives. Whether it's career, whether it's being a female business owner like myself, whether it's having a spouse or a family member who's died, not having kids, keeping up the pace, keeping up with the Joneses, in all honesty. And I was reading this book, which I'm still reading and I'm still learning from, but it's a book by Mel Robbins called The Let Them Theory. And it's really interesting theory that actually speaks a little bit to what we're going to be talking to our guest today about. But it's this idea of giving control and power to all of the situations around us. If I bend over backwards to make my spouse happy, maybe I won't disappoint them. If I just say yes to everything, maybe my friends and my coworkers will like me. If I go out of my way to do what my kids need, then maybe they'll always be happy. We do a lot to try to please everybody else. And the problem isn't necessarily us. The problem is the power we unknowingly give to other people. And that's a really interesting concept that I want to sit on for a second. I want us to think about that for a second. What happens instead if we work harder, bend further, shrink smaller? Still, somebody's going to be disappointed. We can't make everybody happy all of the time. Someone's going to criticize. Someone's going to feel angry. They're going to feel hurt. But it doesn't have to be this way. Instead of wasting our time, our energy, and our happiness trying to control the things that we can't control, like other people's opinions, their moods, their actions, what they may say about us, instead we can focus on the one thing that we can control, ourselves. And this is the remarkable thing, and this is what Mel Robbins talks about in her book. When we stop managing everybody else, we realize that we have a lot more power than we even thought. That's an interesting concept. The let them theory is about freedom. 2 simple words, let them. It frees us from the burden of trying to manage other people. When we stop obsessing over what other people may think, say, or do, we finally have the energy to focus on our own life, to stop reacting and start living. Now, this doesn't mean sitting there and saying, I don't care, I'm going to do what I want to do, and I'm I don't care about other people's opinions. I don't care if I hurt somebody else. I'm going to just be me. I'm going to do me. I'm going to just be rude, or I'm going to say things about somebody else, or I'm going to be so competitive that I trample over somebody else. It's not about that. That is not what this is. The let them theory is really about not worrying so much about what other people may think of us. Doesn't mean not doing the right thing. We still need to do the right thing. But instead, what it focuses on most is let them say what they're going to say. Let them do what they're going to do. Let them behave how they're going to behave. What I can control is my reaction. What I can control is what I think, what I feel, how I want to present myself. I can't make everybody happy all of the time. None of us can. And it's a fascinating concept because it also releases a lot of burden. In today's world, there are so many dynamics and so many things that are constantly going on around us. And there are many times that I have sat there and I have worried about doing the best job I possibly can, having the best ratings I possibly can, making sure that I'm always doing and saying something for others, being there for everybody else, worrying about what other people may think or say or do. I can't do that. I shouldn't have to do that. None of us should. The one thing that we can do is be true to who we are internally, be kind to other people, but let them have their own opinions. Let them think what they're going to think. What we can do is be the best version of ourselves that we can be, but make sure that we're making decisions that are right for us. Decisions that fit with our values, our morals, our moral compass. Those are the things that matter most. And when we do that and we let go of this trying to control and navigate what other people are going to perceive or how they're going to see us, or even how we look, how we look from day to day, our appearance based on other people's judgments. When we let go of all of that and we just stay true to the work that we're doing, the messages that we ourselves are putting out there, the decisions that we're making that are best for ourselves and maybe our family, then all of a sudden things start to fall into place. And I think that's a really interesting concept. Now, I'm still reading this book, so I will keep you all posted because I haven't finished reading this. So I'm still learning as I go with reading this book. However, I am finding and I am noticing that all I can do in this life is be the best version of myself that I want to be. Compassionate, honest, caring. I want to give to others. I want to help people as much as possible. But I'm not going to make my decisions based on what other people think. I'm going to make my decisions based on the values and the morals that I have. Based on the fact that I care and I want to help others. Based on the fact that I want to be honest, pure, true, good-hearted, caring. Those are the decisions that I want to base how I live my life on. Our guest today has done the same thing. She has come up against so many battles and so many hurdles in her life to get to where she is now. And yet she still cut a path for herself. She joins us next after a quick word from our premier sponsor.
This season of the Game On Glio Podcast is sponsored by GT MedTech and Gametile Therapy. Learn more at gametile.com. This season is also sponsored by IMVAX, personalized, blue tumor-derived immunotherapy. Learn more at imvax.com. This episode is sponsored by Plus Therapeutics, power and precision in radiotherapeutics. Learn more at respect-trials.com and plustherapeutics.com. This episode is sponsored by Carthera, revolutionizing brain treatment with advanced brain therapy. Learn more at sonabird.eu. This episode is sponsored by Highmark Blue Cross Blue Shield, healthcare that's a better fit for your life right now. Learn more at highmark.com.
Welcome back, everybody. Thank you so much for being with us here on the Game On Glio podcast. Today we have Dr. Sheri Dewan, and she is this amazing trailblazer when it comes to female neurosurgeons in this industry. She's board certified practicing neurosurgeon and the best-selling author of the book, Cutting a Path. She's the chairwoman for the neuroscience at Ascension Health and serves as clinical professor at Chicago Medical School. She is one of roughly 200 board-certified women neurosurgeons in the United States, and we will be talking about that. She has completed her neurosurgery residency at Brown University and has a graduate degree from Northwestern University. She is a proud board member of Women in Neurosurgery, Congress of Neurological Surgeons, the CNS, and the American Association of Neurological Surgeons. She donates a lot of her time in performing charity surgery in southern India and sits on multiple charity foundation boards. Dr. Dewan is trilingual, which is very impressive, in both English, Spanish, and Hindi, and has lived in 5 different countries. Her clinical interests include minimally invasive robotic and endoscopic spine surgery, and she holds medical licensing both in the US, in India, and in Qatar. So, Dr. Dewan, thank you so much for being with us today.
Oh, it's my pleasure to be here. I'm really excited to kind of dive into our conversation and, go from there. So very excited to be here.
Thank you. So, yeah, let's dive right in, because we talked about this book that you wrote called Cutting a Path. And what I think is interesting is that when you felt the desire and the need to write this book, we both kind of had the same drive, where when I first started Game On Glio, there were no other podcasts out there that were talking about rare cancers like brain cancer in a storytelling way. There were a couple of medical podcasts, but nothing else yet existed. And so I saw this gap. I saw this need to really find a way to share information. And you did the same thing when you wrote the book, Cutting a Path. When you first started writing the book, how do you feel? Do you feel that your goals stayed the same throughout, or do you feel like they shifted a little bit the further you got into writing it?
Yeah, originally when I started writing Cutting a Path, I was actually a resident.
Okay.
And I was pregnant with my first child, my daughter. And I was really inspired to write the book because I had gone through a scenario where I was actually taking out a brain tumor. And I had horrible morning sickness. And so it was this dialogue internally of like, how do I deal with this? I'm trying to take care of this patient. They had a GBM. I was resecting the tumor. At the same time, I'm becoming a mother. I'm going through morning sickness. How do I reconcile all these different aspects of my life? And so after that moment passed, and thankfully it passed, and I was able to take care of the patient and take the tumor out, I thought a lot about writing that story down and thinking about how in the literature that was out there for women, which, I had read the other books by women neurosurgeons, Dr. Connolly's book, Walking Out on the Boys.
Yep.
Dr. Furlick's book, Another Day in the Frontal Lobe. I had read those books by women neurosurgeons. They were also, 10 to 20 years books that had come out. I mean, they were older, much older, a different generation than myself. But I just felt there was a gap in the literature. So I wanted to write the book. And I started collecting journals of stories, of written stories. And then by the time I finished residency, I had almost 10 books of just written stories. So I think the goal originally was, to chronicle some of these journeys that were happening very uniquely to women in the neurosurgical space. But then more broadly, as I started writing it really in earnest over the next 10 years, I think it became more about really trying to inspire people to do really audacious, hard things, and to know that we're also capable of getting and reaching those goals.
So it took you 10 years to write that?
It was close to 10 years. Yeah. And it's
Wow.
not that it was being written, every single day, but there would be
Yep.
gaps of time that would go by and I would kind of leave it aside and then I would pick it back up. And so there was kind of this, but it ended up being it was actually over 10 years by the time it ended up being published.
See, I think that's amazing. And the reason I like highlighting that is because it it is a labor of love. And I think that anything worth pursuing is worth pursuing regardless of how long it takes. And this is a perfect example of that. When I published my first novel, it took me 4.5 years to write the very first one. So, but when you're that passionate about something that you really want people to read or people to know about, it doesn't matter how long it takes. So I think that because you were juggling many things. It's not like you had time you were just focusing on the book and nothing else. So I
Right.
think that's fascinating. I think it's also crucial to mention that i- in writing this book and as you were collecting these stories, we've touched on it already briefly that there are roughly only 200 to 220 women neurosurgeons in the United States. Why do you think that is?
Well, I think that there's a lot of reasons why women choose not to go into the field. And one of them is just our biological clocks, to be perfectly honest. I mean, we have a 7-year residency, so your people are doing traditional 4 years of undergrad, 4 years of medical school, 7 years of residency. And by the time you're done, many, many women are in their mid 30s.
Mhm.
Um, and so I think from a biological clock standpoint, a lot of women feel like I can't have kids if I'm a neurosurgeon. The two
Mm.
don't intermingle. For me personally, I have three. So
There you
I've
go.
I've really bucked the trend, but I've also been someone who never really takes no for an answer. I mean, I've always just kind of felt like, I'm not going to fall into these stereotypes of what it's supposed to be. So I think there's that. I also think there's a lack of mentorship for women,
Oh, interesting.
kind of globally, because
Mhm.
we don't have a lot of female mentors to look up to. We
Yeah,
have a lot of male mentors to look up to, and some of them are just phenomenal and professionally are just the most supportive individuals, but they're not going through the unique circumstances that women go through.
right.
So I think that coupled with the length of the residency, opportunities for women, I mean, I think now, hopefully, um, as more women are coming into the residency space,
Mhm.
hopefully those numbers will slowly start to increase over the next 10 years.
That would be wonderful to see, and having conversations like this hopefully shows other women that it can be done. You can buck tradition, you can multitask, you can accomplish this while also accomplishing personal goals that you have. And so I think the more women we have out there that can be the example for other women, the more supported they feel. And I think that we need more of that, regardless if it's the neurosurgery industry or if it's women owned businesses. I think in any facet, in any way, we need to be able to stick together and actually support each other instead of fighting each other within the industry
Yeah.
to be top of the game. So I think that's really vital.
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, even in neurosurgery, there's so much, there could be conflict when
Mhm.
two women neurosurgeons are, they say feeding from the same trough, right? Um,
Yeah.
but the reality is that we collectively, when we support and collaborate together, we're
Mhm.
actually stronger. And
Yeah.
that's one of the things that I really enjoy about being a part of Women in Neurosurgery, because it's a group of women neurosurgeons who really work collaboratively to get the message out nationally, internationally. So that's been really rewarding work.
That's amazing. So now when you were writing the book Cutting a Path, it took 10 years, but what obstacles did you come up against? Like was there ever a point where you were like, I don't know if I'm going to be able to get this finished or get this done? And how did you overcome those obstacles?
Yeah, I mean, the book actually almost didn't get published because, so, there was, I think, two or three key points in time that the book almost didn't get published for different reasons.
Mhm.
the first point in time was like maybe 6 years into the right, where I just didn't have the time. I
Yeah.
was full-time practicing neurosurgeon. I have 3 kids, 2 dogs, husband, like
Yeah.
it just didn't have the hours in the day.
Yeah.
So there was kind of a crossroads where I said, do I need to get this out? Do I really need to do this? And the answer was yes, actually, because I really felt like the space was empty for women
Hmm.
and it just needed to be out in the world. I didn't know if it was going to be a bestseller. I didn't know, the success of it. I knew nothing about the audience and how people would enjoy it or if they wouldn't, but I just needed for myself to have it out in the
Yeah.
world. The other crossroads really came around the time of COVID because the publishing industry kind of shut down for a
Hmm.
while. And we had a publishing deal with HarperCollins for
Okay.
one of their book imprints, and it was like 2019. And right when 2020 hit, the deal evaporated.
Oh,
So we were kind of back to the drawing board with this book, and I thought, forget it. It's not the right time. It's not meant to be.
yeah.
And then in 2022, my agent said, let's take it back out to the publishers. And that's when we got our deal with Brown Books. But
Wow.
so there was definitely like 3 key points in this journey that I thought it may not happen.
I there was this quote, and I always screwed up, but a writing mentor of mine who used to work at Writer's Digest when I first started out in the writing industry, and I was working on this first book to publish. There were many times where I sat there and said, I just don't think it's going to happen. I don't think I'm going to be able to get this done. I don't think it's going to get out there. And she had said to me at one point, she said, right at the moment, at the pivotal moment of failure or when you're about to quit and give up is the moment when you're actually about to succeed. But because you quit, because you walked away, you'll never know that you were actually on the cusp of getting it done. And I this speaks to that in volumes because I think that that's really what anything in life that's worth doing. So many people, you hit a hard point and you decide to walk away. Well, you don't realize that you were right there. You were right on the cusp of something great. But because you walked away, you'll never know.
Yeah, no, that's really profound. I feel like, many people give up a little too soon in what
Yeah.
they're doing. And it's not to say that every situation you have to stick it out, but
Mhm.
I mean, if the situation isn't conducive to success,
Mhm.
but I think there is a lot of us trying to make it work, and I'm one of these people who doesn't take no for an answer. I'll find a way around it. I mean, I actually have a chapter, in the book entitled that. And that's been the story of my life, in many different facets, whether it's, being told you can't be a woman neurosurgeon, you can't be a
Mhm.
mother and a neurosurgeon, you can't be a neurosurgeon and an author, you can't publish a book. I mean, there's so many different facets to it.
Yeah.
Um, so I think, but that's a really profound kind of statement, I think, from your writing mentor, and very, very true.
Yeah. And this actually speaks to my next question because when you were in the field, when you were starting out, and I believe it was at the CNS conference a couple of years ago, you and I were having a little sidebar and you mentioned this story about when you were doing your residency and you were actually dissuaded by a male director to be part of the program, but you also got pushback from, I believe, other females that you were friends with or in your circle. They weren't necessarily in the industry, but for just continuing to push this path because you were starting a family. Do you think that that experience and that time all those years ago has changed? Do you think the needle has moved at all with that frame of thought between then and now?
I think it has moved somewhat. Because I do think there is a little bit more acceptance now of women neurosurgeons or women in medicine having children.
Okay.
Um, but I don't think it's moved enough, to the point where you look at other countries and there's maternity leave, there's paternity leave, there's all
Mhm.
these different things in place for people when they have children. And I just don't feel societally we're there yet, even with childcare and so many different facets of juggling things, So I think the needle has moved. But I'd really like to see more equality, especially for women in the field who are trying to, bring life into the world.
Mm-hmm.
And I think in the book, there was one portion where I kind of described how, you know, my colleagues were so anti the pregnancy, right?
Yeah.
And it's so shocking to me how people who save lives are so anti people who are giving lives.
Yeah.
So I think that aspect of medicine is almost a paradox, in some strange way.
That's really interesting. I think that it sheds a light on a larger issue that we have with women being in complex industries like this or high stress industries like this and how far we still need to go. I'm also a little surprised that we haven't gotten further along the way from your experience during residency to where we are now. It's kind of sad to hear that the needle has moved a little bit, but it hasn't moved enough. And it makes you wonder, okay, how long is it actually going to take to get where we want to be? When with women who I have a lot of women who follow the work that we do at Game On Glio, but also the work I do owning a media company. And I get a lot of questions about barriers to the work that I do. So when it comes to entering the medical surgery arena or even the neurosurgical arena, what do you feel is still a barrier for women entering that industry?
I think it's just, one of the things about neurosurgery or medicine is if we don't see faces that look like us,
Mhm.
we don't know it's possible,
Yeah.
right? We don't believe it's possible. So I think it's, the mentorship, the role models, the opportunities that we're given. And, and think in many ways, women aren't set up for success. They're set up in these roles where, they're not tapped for academic positions. They're not
Mhm.
tapped for full professor tenureships. They're always in the assistant professor category or so they're not, there's a, we call it a leaky pipeline, they'll say at these, women in neurosurgery conferences, the pipeline to get to chair or a
Mhm.
chair position is fraught with obstacles for a woman and for a man too, but
Mhm.
sometimes the men have more mentorship and more guidance. So, I mean, I think those are some of the obstacles for women. And then, to just the daily life, in many scenarios, women are expected to not only be working, but then also taking care of the home, taking care of all the aspects of the home.
Mhm.
So I think, from a professional and personal standpoint, I think it can be really a huge challenge for women to, find the support system, whether it's a
Mhm.
supportive partner, supportive colleagues, all of that.
It's almost as if it's a habituated thinking that is just kind of like systemically followed us into the 21st century and beyond. This idea of, women can multitask, but women are supposed to multitask. We're supposed to
Yeah.
be able to just do everything without support or without a foundation of other people that are helping us out. That, well, if you're going to take that on, you have to be okay taking that on because you also have to do this.
Right.
And that, we can't get support while we're doing these things. Do you think that the American Women's Neurosurgery or Women's Surgical Association that you're a part of, do you think that that group or that other groups or communities of women that are out there in the neurosurgery space, do you think that there's support in that way, that there are places that women can go to kind of find a foundation or a pillar of support as they're navigating this journey?
I think it's definitely a great place to go for that sort of foundation.
Hmm.
I, myself have seen even that organization over the last 25 years, even from the time I was a young resident all the way through my career, shifting mindsets.
Okay.
It's so much more collaborative and supportive than it used to be when we first started it.
Hmm.
So I think, the pendulum will swing, and I think we're going to come to a place where there's a lot more positivity and optimism about where we sit, and the natural order of things. So, and I look forward to what the next 5 to 10 years look like for women in not only in neurosurgery and the medical field, but also in, more broadly business, law, those types, and then STEM careers. So I look forward to seeing where that goes.
Yeah, me too, to be honest. And I've seen that push in the engineering space. So from a STEM perspective, in the engineering space, I've seen this surge of women in engineering roles and in high profile chair positions for engineering, core engineering, which is exciting to see. But I would like to see that branch out further. So I agree with you. What what made you decide to choose neurosurgery? What was it about neurosurgery that you were like, yes, this is where I have to go. This is the direction that I have to go in.
Yeah, I mean, I always loved the brain, even from the time I was a little girl, 10 years old, go to the library every week and check out books about the human brain, biology books. I was just fascinated. And
Wow.
as I got older, I wanted to involve myself in neuroscience research. We had a family friend who was a physician. He had a research lab, and I would go in high school and spend summers just in the lab. And I saw my first surgery one of those summers, and
Did you really? How
I did.
how old were you?
I was 14 years old. I cannot believe they
Wow.
let me into the operating room, but they did. Now the cutoff is like 16, but
Yeah.
I mean, I saw surgery for the first time. I got to put the scrubs on, go in the OR. I mean, it's absolutely
Wow.
floored. And you kind of just know where you belong,
Yeah.
and so, then time went on. And then, I had a pivotal experience in my life, a traumatic experience. And my mother almost passed away from a ruptured brain aneurysm when she was 49.
Wow.
So she was young,
Yeah.
and, sudden severe headache. Went to the emergency room, and lo and behold, she's had a brain hemorrhage, a massive brain hemorrhage. And that's when I met a neurosurgeon for the first time. And his name was Dr. Johnson, Dr. Doug Johnson. And he operated on her and saved her life. And
Mhm.
so I felt at that point that this was going to be my path because, he was just an incredible human being. And, I felt the skills and the knowledge that he knew in order
Mm.
to save her were just phenomenal. And so I wanted to emulate that path. And so that's really what set me off on, the journey of becoming a neurosurgeon. And then, there are so many different crossroads you come to in your career path. And there was a time where I thought, well, maybe I'll go into neurology versus
Mhm.
neurosurgery because neurosurgery is too hard and it's too long. And at that point, my husband, really, who we weren't even married at the time, he was my fiance, his name's Alex, said to me, I don't want you to regret the path that you chose in 10 years. And if you really want to be a neurosurgeon, even if it's going to be really hard and really long hours and it's going to be really tough to have kids, like you should do it. You should go for your goal. And
Mhm.
so really it was his support that really pushed me kind of over the finish line, for applying for that type of residency.
I gotta tip my hat to him and give him a huge thank you because we don't come across those kind of men very often in life. And my late husband was the exact same way when I switched careers completely after getting a master's degree and spending 10 years in one direction. And then I sat down with him one night and I said, hun, I've been writing my entire life. I have been in the media field my entire life, but I've been doing it on the side because I've been scared to really dive in. But I'm not happy doing this other. I think I can combine the two. I think I can combine social work and trauma care with working in the writing industry. And it was his support. He said, you got to do it. You've got to quit your job, move into this industry, get whatever certifications you need to get. But it was that support. It was his support and belief in me that allowed me to kind of switch directions. And it sounds like Alex did the same thing. And we need those kind of men
We
in
really
our lives.
do. We really
Yeah.
so they're rare, and I think they're so hard to find. And I hear from so many friends that I have who are in really high-powered careers, and they struggle, a lot with finding that male supportive partner,
Hmm.
to really back them up. And I feel really lucky that Alex has been my support structure. We've been married for 20 years. And I do feel like so fortunate to have met him and um, gone on this journey with him. And he's been through all of it, from the very beginning all the way through the residency, after part, everything. And so, but I don't think if he hadn't supported me and my family hadn't supported me, I don't know. It may have been too hard,
Yeah.
And so I think that those people behind you are just such key players in these huge decisions.
Well, you need that support system. I think no matter what you do in life, I think you need to have a really strong support system and a network of those pillars, because those pillars are your foundation. Even if you're your own pillar, you still need those other legs to kind of help you navigate whatever journeys you go through in life. So yeah, I think it's critical. I think it's crucial. I'm going to pivot a little bit because we touched on in your bio that you do a lot of charity work, and you do a lot of charity work, that this charity surgical work overseas. What do you feel that the biggest disparities are in working in these other communities compared to the work that you do in the US?
Yeah, I mean, I think really resources and access are the two biggest issues. We take for granted that, we're going to pick up the phone and call 911 and an
Mhm.
ambulance is going to show up at our house and take us to a
Mhm.
hospital. And in so many of these countries, that's just not a given. They
Mhm.
are in remote villages, they're dirt roads, remote villages in India that are maybe 200 miles away from a large
Oh,
facility like
wow.
in New Delhi or
Yeah.
Mumbai, and struggling with access. In neurosurgery, timing is everything, especially when it
Mhm.
comes to head trauma, and so it's critical that they see a neurosurgeon quickly.
Mhm.
And then resources. We take for granted that we have sterile supplies, that we have a sterile operating room. In
Yeah.
India, there's no air conditioning in the hospital. So, when I
Oh,
go there,
dear.
it is just boiling, and whenever I come home from these trips to India, I'm always so grateful for everything we have here, and it
Mhm.
really puts this lens on, what we do and how easy it is for us to do it,
Yep.
here, when they're struggling with, the very basics. So,
I think
that's
it's a
one
good
thing.
reminder too, right? That's a really good reminder of how grateful we really are to live in a country like this where there aren't restrictions, there aren't lack of resources, where just basic care and basic needs like that are always met. Um, there are so many countries that just don't have access to what they need, or live in these desert communities where they're too far away from. I mean, I see it. I did a public speaking engagement on food disparities and how that impacts brain health and general health and women's health during the course of perimenopause and menopause. And they live in these food deserts and they just don't have the same access. And that's right here in the US. Now you put that on a more global scale when it comes to basic healthcare needs and even surgical needs. For surgeons to do the best job they can do, you have to have the right resources around you. So thinking about, you being in a sweltering hospital
Yeah.
in another country, and you're trying to give back and help out these patients that are coming in and there's no AC, wouldn't even cross my mind that a hospital
Yeah.
wouldn't have AC.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's that basic, and, supplies, it's pretty common to do a surgery and there's only one stitch to close the entire, all the skin, and you just have to make it work, and so, I come back and I always, like I said, feel so grateful at the end of our surgeries. We have bags of garbage and all the supplies are open, and there,
Mhm.
they open one thing at a time because they don't want to waste. And so
Wow.
I think a lot about like the medical waste too that we use so much. And I mean, everything there is washable, like all of the drapes for surgery are washed. And, here we just rip it off, throw it in the garbage,
Yep.
and
Yep.
so there's things like that I think are very different, and it makes me so extremely grateful and appreciative every single time I go and come back
Mm-hmm.
that we have this healthcare system here, as broken as people feel it is, and as broken as I think it is sometimes too. I think,
Relatively
I
speaking.
relatively speaking, I am
Yeah.
grateful for for what we have.
So let's broaden that a little bit, because even though we have this amazing healthcare system with its faults and whatnot here in the U.S., the climate is changing. The landscape is changing governmentally, politically. And I've already seen some domino effects of that when it comes to spinal surgeries, brain cancer, spinal cancer, CNS cancers, um, clinical trials, innovation that is trying to take place to help these rare cancers. Do you, th- what do you think, or what do you worry about when it comes to what's going on and the changes that are taking place? How do you think that that could impact or hinder the progress that we're making when it comes to spinal and brain cancers?
I mean, I think the funding is huge. If
Mhm.
we stop funding research for these diseases, they're just we're not going to be able to find cures. We're not going to be able to
Mhm.
investigate.
Yeah.
So I think we're going to go behind in progress, and we've come so far. We still have
Yeah.
so much farther to go, but I worry a lot too about how they're changing reimbursements now,
Yep.
and they're cutting back on reimbursements for specialists,
Mhm.
and and trying to increase reimbursement for primary care, which I think is great in so
Mhm.
many ways because we need more primary care doctors.
Mhm.
But at the same time, there is a lot of work and time and energy and effort that goes into being a specialist.
Yeah.
And so, I'm concerned that maybe people in medical schools aren't going to want to go into the subspecialties because the reimbursements are going to be cut. And so that concerns me too, what the next 10, 15 years is going to look like for, my field, or, the cardiac field, or,
Mhm.
anything that's really kind of like a very lengthy residency.
Yeah, my hope is that we don't see a domino effect that can't be reversed quickly with what's currently going on, because just in the last 5 years, I mean, when Mike was first diagnosed in 2019, probably 85% of what is available now was not available then, and that was just 5 years ago. So you look at how far the industry has come with its push to really help find better treatments, find cures, find more stability in giving people longevity with these diseases. I would hate to see that take a step back when we have really, there's been an energy and a fire underneath of this for the last 4 or 5 years. I don't want to see that fire go out.
Yeah.
So yeah, so I can understand it from that perspective, and I'm hoping um that the dominoes don't fall too far. I guess.
Yeah, yeah. No, I hope so too, especially for, people like yourself that have been deeply affected,
Yeah.
by glioblastoma and
Mhm.
brain cancer, and so many families that have been affected. We were affected by, my mom's brain aneurysm,
Mhm.
and so, I do a lot of work with the Aneurysm Foundation
Mhm.
to bring awareness, I think. And I think about her situation. 20 years ago, there was none of these resources that we have now.
Yeah.
None. I mean, we were like left in this void where nobody knew what it was. Nobody talked about it. There was minimal communication. I mean, now there are support groups. You can go on social media, you can find people. So it has changed for the better, I think. And it makes you feel like you're not as alone when you have something like this happen to you that's life
Mhm.
changing.
Yeah, I agree. When when you were starting out in this industry and in neurosurgery, as you went along, you had to have come up against days, or just come up against a wall where you were like, "You know what? Am I really doing the right thing? Did I take the right step? Did I go down the right path? Did I make the right decision?" I think everybody has those moments where you're like, "Okay, did I make the right decision? Am I doing the right thing?" In having those moments, if you have had those moments, because it does sound like from the day you could walk, and it almost sounds like my late husband was the same way with engineering. Literally from the day he could put a tool in his hand, he knew that he wanted to be an engineer. But if you've had those moments, was there any one story or something that stood out that just in a moment like that, where it was like something happened that showed you, yep, nope, I'm on the right path, or I needed this today, I needed this message, or a patient whose life you had saved. And I mean, was there something like divine, some kind of divine message that kind of just came your way to tell you that has always stuck with you? Because I've had those messages myself in doing the work that I'm doing now, and doing patient advocacy work. And I've heard from so many other doctors that are like, oh God, yeah, I've got this one story of this patient who was on this table. And so do you have a story like that?
Well, I do. I mean, in the book I write about the moment I almost quit. And I was a sixth year resident, and I was pregnant with my second daughter. And I had never faltered in neurosurgery. Like
Okay.
this was the path. This was what I was going to do.
I figured.
Like I made it.
Yeah.
This was it, right? But all of a sudden, I'm a sixth year resident, and now I have one beautiful daughter at home, and now I'm pregnant with daughter number two.
Hmm.
And the support was not there. Like family support, yes,
Hmm.
but collegial support. And I was in a conference, a grand rounds type of situation. And there was one particular attending surgeon, neurosurgeon, who had made it pretty clear that he didn't believe that motherhood and neurosurgery could coexist. And in that conference, which had about 100 people in it,
Hmm.
he proceeded to kind of like go on a verbal attack. And at the time, I was very pregnant with my second daughter. So I was
Hmm.
almost 6 months pregnant. And at the end of that, and it was basically, we were discussing a patient scenario, and essentially it was, him trying to point out my weaknesses, my knowledge weaknesses. And at the end of that day, I was like, that's it. That's it. Like I'm done. I've had it.
That was your wall. That was your
That was
wall.
my wall. I'm like, I'm massively pregnant. I'm trying to make it work. I'm taking call. I'm at the hospital at 5 a.m. I leave at 10 p.m. Like my
Hmm.
legs were huge, like swollen. And I came home that night and I told Alex, like, this is it. Like, I'm gonna be done with this. And, that evening I called my parents, I talked to them, I talked to Alex. And before I went to bed, I thought about like the reasons why, like I was a neurosurgeon, right? And I thought
Hmm.
about my mom, and I thought about, gosh, if Dr. Johnson would have just thrown in the towel,
Hmm.
he wouldn't have been there to save her,
Yep.
right? And I started thinking about all of the neurosurgeons in history that I've read so many books about, like Sir William Osler or Harvey
Hmm.
Cushing, or the first neurosurgeons who people didn't believe them or said, you can't do that, or,
Hmm.
and they just kept on going because they had enough tenacity and strength in themselves, that they knew their own capabilities. And so I think that's really what pushed me to stay. And I remember the next morning I got up and I just went to work like it was any other day, and so, but that was my moment. That was the moment I almost quit. And I'm really glad I didn't. I'm glad that I stuck with it. I pushed ahead. And, I think it was the stories of not only my mother, but also the people that had come before me, and the patients and the lives that they had saved. And,
Hmm.
you kind of think about that collective effect, and you think, if I throw in the towel,
Yeah.
then, think about all the people that aren't going to be treated because of that. Like I was almost done with my residency at that point.
And I think it goes back to that quote that I mentioned earlier. At the
Mhm.
pivotal moment where you want to quit and give up is the moment where you're actually going to succeed. And it sounds like that was that moment for you.
Yeah, very much so, very much
Yeah.
so. And, and now when people come to me, there have been other residents that have come and said they want to be done, or they, and I tell them that story, and I remind them, that there is a light at the end of the tunnel. It may feel like it's really far away, but you have to think about what you want for your life and
Mhm.
how you want to live. What is your purpose?
Yeah.
And so I think for me, it was very purpose driven. It was, I want to be able to take care of other people's mothers and
Mhm.
daughters and husbands and wives, and if I throw in the towel, I won't be able to do that.
Yeah.
So
Or even do the work that you're doing in other countries. I mean, none of that would have happened. You wouldn't be having the impact you're having outside of the US. So, I want to give our listeners some positivity when it comes to, because it's a hard field to be in. And I work with a lot of patients doing patient advocacy, and I seem to be getting more and more of the calls, the referrals that are coming in for patients that are getting diagnosed with a CNS, primary CNS, or primary brain cancer. What are some current clinical trials or outcomes that you feel are really positive when it comes to treating uh, primary spinal cancers or brain cancers? What do you feel is really hopeful in what you're seeing right now?
yeah, I mean, I think immunotherapy is really exciting. When I read about the trials for immunotherapy and how we're using vaccines for brain tumors, that really excites me. I wonder what that's going to look like in 5 years. Are we just going to be, taking a vaccine for this? It's
Mhm.
just incredible to even think about.
That would be great.
Wouldn't it be amazing?
That would be so great.
I think about like technical things like intraoperative MRI technology
Yep.
that, where you can resect a brain tumor and then have the patient go into the MRI scanner and say, oh, okay, wait, there's a little bit more right there. Let's take more.
Mhm.
And so I really love having those tools at my disposal in the operating room where I can use them to be technically better and do a better surgery.
And we need to highlight the fact that that is huge, because if there was a point in time where you would go in, do the surgery, close somebody up, and then all of a sudden realize, nope, we did another scan. There's still more. We found this one. Now we have to go back in. And that actually harms a patient. There's so much research and evidence to show that a patient who has to have back to back spinal or brain surgeries before they've actually healed from the first one tend to do worse in recovery when they've been opened back up so quickly. And so being able to be in the operating room and have technology like that is so crucial and so vital, because you're right there. Nope, we've got this one. Oh, nope, we're still seeing this one, and they're still on the operating table, and then they can just heal and let their body heal the way it needs to without having to all of a sudden turn around, put them under, and go back in again.
Exactly. So, I mean, it makes me a better surgeon
Mhm.
because, it allows me to get the job done even better.
Mhm.
So those types of tools I think are really fantastic. And I'm really excited about what the next 5 or 10 years are going to look like for this field.
Yeah.
And if we can keep the momentum going with clinical trials and research and enrollment of patients, I think that we can make a lot more progress. And I'm really hopeful for that.
It makes me excited to think about that. To think about immunotherapies and vaccines. I feel like we are on the verge. I feel like we're on the cusp and we're just not quite there yet, but I definitely feel like there's something coming. We just haven't gotten to it yet, but I feel like we're at a tipping point.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely. Definitely. I mean, like I said, I'm very hopeful. I mean, there's nanotechnology, there's
Yep.
discussions about that, biospheres. I mean, there's so many things now that, um, obviously my hope is that one day we will eradicate
Yeah.
brain tumors, brain cancer, and we won't even be having these sorts of discussions because it'll be a non issue. But until then, we have a lot of work to do to get there.
Mhm.
And so I think staying hopeful, being optimistic, and keeping ourselves knowledgeable about what's out there is really going to help us.
For other young women who are just starting out, who are in their early 20s, who are looking or entertaining the idea of going into this industry, especially such a male-dominated industry, what's one thing you would want them to know, or that you would wanna tell them if they're toying around with becoming a female in this industry?
If you really invested in doing it, just know that you're so capable. I mean, there are times where I surprised myself, and I didn't know I had some of these things in me. And, when you're pushed to the limit, at least I surprised myself and how capable I could be.
Mm-hmm.
I would find, a mentor. I would find somebody who you trust, who you can talk to about the field, shadow people, get into the operating room. Do you like it? Do you love it? If you love it and
Mm-hmm.
you know it's the place for you, you're going to know pretty quickly. So that's what I would say. Get as much exposure as you possibly can to the field and to the people.
Mm-hmm.
And I think you'll know pretty quickly. It's, we're kind of a rare breed.
Yes, this is true. That is so true.
We're
Yeah.
kind of a rare breed. So I think if you know, you just know. So
Yeah. Now, if somebody decides, if you've got a young woman who decides, yes, this is what I want to do, can they join like the Women's Neurosurgery Association or other women neurosurgeon foundations? Can they join those associations so early on? Or is that something where, they really have to get through their residency and then they can kind of become part of these associations? But are there things that they can do as they're starting out to get that support if they've made the decision that, yes, this is the direction I want to go in?
yeah, I mean, our membership is open to medical students. So if anybody wants to join, they can join. Our meetings are open to anybody.
Okay.
We have two big meetings every year. We have one at the Congress of Neurosurgery, and
Hmm.
then the AANS, the American Association of Neurological Surgeons. Those meetings are open to anybody. We have men come. We have anybody can
Probably a
come.
good idea.
Yeah, I mean, they come to men. The men come too, and they sit and they listen to what we're doing, and what we're working on organizationally. So get involved. Come to the national meetings. That's the best place to meet people. Spend time really learning about the field to understand if it's really for you.
I love that. How do you strike that work-life balance for, especially now that the book is out and the book just blew up, which I love. How do you find that work-life balance with all that you do and the charity work, giving so much of yourself to so many others? How do you replenish that for yourself so that you don't become kind of a shell of yourself or just so worn down? So how do you find that balance?
Yeah, I mean, I try not to overschedule myself. I like to have downtime just for me to do things like, I love to run. I do a lot of yoga. I have three kids. They're all very busy. I love being like a good mom and being
Mhm.
involved in their activities. So, I mean, I think carving out time for myself and just, one thing is just putting the phone away and actually putting
Yep.
it in a drawer and just, putting it away. If I'm not on call,
Yeah.
I don't need to be available. Just getting those like off the grid type of breaks, I think
Yeah.
is really key, because otherwise it's just constantly, message after message. And sometimes you just feel like you're putting out one fire after another, and that's the whole
Yeah.
day.
Yeah.
So I think that a really kind of good workout exercise routine that you stick to.
Mhm.
And, I try to meditate every day for, 5 or 10 minutes, even if it's a small little bit in the day, just to kind of take a pause and empty my mind, um, and kind of focus on like larger goals instead of focusing on the day-to-day tasks that we need to get done.
Mhm.
So I always like to think more broadly, and my kids will laugh at me, but I keep like I plan for our family a year in advance.
Do
So
you really?
I do. And it's like everything. It's like our trips, everything. It's all planned, roughly. And they laugh at me that I'm such a planner, but that's what helps me stay focused
Mhm.
because I may not have like every detail, but I know like at this month, this is what we're going to be doing. And so I have these like broader goals, as the year goes on. So I think like staying organized, being a good planner, carving out time for myself, and then,
Mhm.
meditation and a combination of like exercise and yoga, I think it's really been really good for me.
Now, I mean, I want to ask this before we wrap because I meditate as well. And I actually, every morning, I power my phone off and I will sit for about 20 minutes to meditate. And meditation is extremely beneficial, not only emotionally and to reduce stress, but it's physiologically extremely beneficial. So, as somebody in the neurosurgery industry, can you just touch on that really quickly about the benefits of meditation for your brain health, for your heart health, for your overall, physical and emotional wellness? Because there is so much research backing meditation.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at the physiology of meditation, even how it lowers our heart rate and,
Mhm.
keeps our cardiovascular system from being in overdrive and our brain from being in overdrive. And
Mhm.
there've been a lot of studies about the vagus nerve, which is our nerve that basically helps to kind of relax the body, and how that helps with even our vital signs and our blood pressure and our pulse, and how we have the ability to control our own vital signs, and
Mhm.
so I think there is a lot of old age wisdom in some of these things, and I think we would be wise as a modern world to tap into what people have been doing for hundreds of thousands of years to keep themselves well.
Yes. Yes.
So
I agree with that. Dr. Dewan, thank you so, so much for taking the time to do this. This information is so vital. I think it's inspiring. Hopefully, it encourages other young women to consider this field, especially if there's something in their gut that is tugging them in this direction, not to ignore that, because we need more women like you in this industry, in this field. For anybody who wants to read your book, where can they find Cutting a Path?
so you can actually get a copy from my website. It's pretty easy. It's www.drsheridewan.com. So you can purchase one from the publisher direct on the site. You can also find it on Amazon and Barnes and Noble. We're in Target. We're in Walmart. So there's a lot of different places just to find it. And I'm happy to connect with readers. I've been really, really overwhelmed at the number of people that have reached out to me over the last year and a half since the publication of the book. It's been extremely powerful. People who've shared just deeply personal stories about their journeys with their family members dealing with brain issues, and
Mhm.
from all over the world. And the book is now in Australia, Switzerland, Dubai. It went into the bookstores in London. So I have readers kind of reaching out from all parts of the world. It's been really, really powerful and really incredible.
I love that. Thank you so much for doing this. It just means the world to me, and it teaches us so much. It's such a broader conversation about what we need to be paying attention to. So I'm so, so grateful to have had you on the show. To all of our listeners and those who are watching, thank you so much for joining us. And with that, we will be right back. You've been listening to the Game On Glio podcast, the podcast that is designed to educate, advocate, and tell the real stories of those walking the journey of brain cancers such as glioblastoma and grief and loss. Like what you hear? Share us with others. Follow us on Instagram at Game On Glio Podcast, Facebook at Game On Glio, or visit our website or YouTube channel. You can find us anywhere podcasts are played.